Quake is a 1996 first-person shooter game developed by ID Software and published by GT Interactive. The first game in the Quake series, it was originally released for MS-DOS and Microsoft Windows, followed by Mac OS, Linux, and Sega Saturn in 1997 and Nintendo 64 in 1998. The game's plot is centered around teleportation experiments, dubbed slipgates, which have resulted in an unforeseen invasion of Earth by a hostile force codenamed Quake, which commands a vast army of monsters. The player takes the role of a soldier, later dubbed Ranger, whose mission is to travel through the slipgates in order to find and destroy the source of the invasion. The game is split between futuristic military bases and medieval, Gothic environments, featuring both science fiction and fantasy weaponry and enemies as the player battles possessed soldiers and demonic beasts, such as ogres or armor-clad knights. Quake heavily takes inspiration from Gothic fiction and in particular the works of H.P. Lovecraft. The game went through many revisions during development and had originally been inspired by a Dungeons & Dragons campaign held among ID Software staff. The successor to ID Software's Doom series, Quake built upon the technology and gameplay of its predecessor. Unlike the Doom engine before it, the Quake engine offered full real-time 3D rendering and had early support for 3D acceleration through OpenGL. After Doom helped popularize multiplayer deathmatches, Quake added various multiplayer options. Online multiplayer became increasingly common, with the Quake World update and software such as Quake Spy making the process of finding and playing against others on the internet easier and more reliable. Quake featured music composed by Trent Reznor, and his band 9 Inch Nails. Quake is often cited as one of the best video games ever made. Despite its critical acclaim, Quake's development was controversial in the history of ID Software. As with all other Quake upgrades, Quake World was released as a free, unsupported add-on to the game and was updated numerous times through 1998. In January 1997, an independent developer, Nick Marr, developed a version of the Quake World master server, called Quake World Local, that could be run on a LAN without an internet connection. The software tracked player statistics over time and allowed international players without a Quake World server on their continent, or without internet access at all, to enjoy the new client. On January 22, 1997, ID Software released the first beta of GL Quake. This was designed to use the OpenGL 3D API to access hardware 3D graphics acceleration cards to rasterize the graphics, rather than having the computer CPU fill in every pixel. In addition to higher frame rates for most players, GL Quake provided higher resolution modes and texture filtering. GL Quake also experimented with reflections, transparent water, and even rudimentary shadows. GL Quake came with a driver enabling the subset of OpenGL used by the game to function on the 3DFX Voodoo graphics card, the only consumer-level card at the time capable of running GL Quake well. Previously, John Carmack had experimented with a version of Quake specifically written for the Rendition Vrit chip used in the Creative Labs PCI 3D Blaster card. This version had met with only limited success, and Carmack decided to write for generic APIs in the future rather than tailoring for specific hardware. On March 11, 1997, ID Software released WinQuake, a version of the non-OpenGL engine designed to run under Microsoft Windows. The original Quake had been written for MS-DOS, allowing for launch from Windows 95, but could not run under Windows NT-based operating systems because it needed direct access to hardware. WinQuake instead accessed hardware via Win32-based APIs such as DX-Sound, Direct Input, and DX-Draw that were supported on Windows 95, Windows NT40, and later releases. Like GL Quake, WinQuake also allowed higher resolution video modes. Due to creative differences and a lack of leadership, the majority of the team left the company after the game's release, including co-founder John Romero. This removed the last barrier to widespread popularity of the game. On July 20, 2016, Axel Knighting, an ID Tech employee responsible for implementing the Vulkan rendering path to the ID Tech 6 engine used in Doom 2016, released a source port called VK Quake under the GPL v2. Non-primary source needed. Quake was ported to multiple platforms. The first port to be completed was the Linux port Quake 0.91 by ID Software employee Dave D. Taylor using X11 on July 5, 1996, followed by a Spark Solaris port later that year also by Taylor. An SVGAlib port for Linux was created by programmer Greg Alexander in 1997 using leaked source code, but was later mainlined by ID. Unlike similar unofficial ports for OS/2, Amiga, Java VMs, and Mac OS. The first commercially released port was for Mac OS, done by Macsoft and Lion Entertainment, Inc. The latter company ceased to exist just prior to the port's release, leading to Macsoft's involvement. In late August 1997, Clickboom announced a version for Amiga computers in 1998. Finally, in 1999, a retail version of the Linux port was distributed by Macmillan Digital Publishing USA in a bundle with the two existing add-ons as Quake. The offering. Quake was also ported to home console systems on December 2, 1997. The game was released for the Sega Saturn. Initially, GT Interactive was to publish this version itself, but it later canceled the release and the Saturn rights were picked up by Sega. Sega took the project away from the original development team, who had been encountering difficulties getting the port to run at a decent frame rate, and assigned it to Lobotomy Software. An enhanced version of Quake was developed by Nightdive Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks and was released for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Windows, and Xbox One consoles in August 2021, including the original game's first two expansions and 2 episodes developed by Machine Games. The Saturn port was developed with Softimage 3D and uses Lobotomy Software's 3D engine, Slave Driver, also used in Power Slave and Duke Nukem 3D for the Saturn. It is the only version of Quake rated T14 instead of M for mature. Quake was ported to the PlayStation by Lobotomy Software, but the company was not able to find a publisher for it. A port for the Atari Jaguar was reported as 30% complete in a May 1996 issue of Ultimate Future Games magazine, but it was never released. A port of Quake was planned for Panasonic M2 prior to cancellation of the system. On March 24, 1998, the game was released for the Nintendo 64 by Midway Games. This version was developed by the same programming team that worked on Doom 64, at ID Software's request. The Nintendo 64 version was originally slated to be released in 1997, but Midway delayed it until March 1998 to give the team time to implement the deathmatch modes. Both console ports required compromises because of the limited CPU power and RAM storage space for levels. For example, the levels were rebuilt in the Saturn version in order to simplify the architecture, thereby reducing demands on the CPU. The Saturn version omits the 4 secret levels from the original PC version of the game, replacing them with 4 exclusive secret levels: Purgatorium, Hell's Eyrie, the Colosseum, and Watery Grave. It also contains an exclusive unlockable, Dank and Scuzz, which is a story set in the Quake milieu and presented in the form of a slideshow with voice acting. There are no multiplayer modes in the Saturn version. The Nintendo 64 version includes 25 single-player levels from the PC version, though it is missing the Grizzly Grotto, the installation, the Ebon Fortress, the wind tunnels, the sewage system, and Hell's Atrium. It also does not use the hub map where the player chooses a difficulty level and an episode. The difficulty level is chosen from a menu when starting the game, and all of the levels are played in sequential order. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X/S versions were released in October 2021 in Quake's single-player mode. Players explore levels, facing monsters and finding secret areas before reaching an exit. The Nintendo 64 version, while lacking the cooperative multiplayer mode, includes 2-player deathmatch. All 6 of the deathmatch maps from the PC version are in the Nintendo 64 port, as well as an exclusive deathmatch level, the Court of Death. In 1998, LBE Systems and Lasertron released a prototype titled Quake Arcade Tournament Edition in the arcades in limited quantities. Arcomp Interactive published the game for RISC OS as Quake Resurrection in 1999, including the Total Conversion Malice and expansion Q-Zone, although community-made source ports such as ArcQuake were also available. An unreleased Game Boy Advance port of Quake was in development from Randy Linden in 2002, and was pitched to ID Software in that year. The port was rejected by the company, and Linden's work would remain unused until prototypes of his work were dumped in June 2022. 2 homebrew ports of Quake for the Nintendo DS exist, Quake DS and Sequake. Both run well. However, multiplayer does not work on Quake DS. Since the source code for Quake was released, a number of unofficial ports have been made available for PDAs and mobile phones, such as Pocket Quake. as well as versions for the Symbian S60 series of mobile phones and Android mobile phones. The Rockbox project also distributes a version of Quake that runs on some MP3 players in 2005. ID Software signed a deal with publisher Pulse Interactive to release a version of Quake for mobile phones. The game was engineered by Californian company Bare Naked Productions, initially due to be released on only two mobile phones, the Samsung Nexus, for which it was to be an embedded game, and the LG VX 360. Quake Mobile was reviewed by GameSpot on the Samsung Nexus, and they cited its US release as October 2005. They also gave it a Best Mobile Game in their E3 2005 Editor's Choice Awards. Switches or keys open doors, and reaching the exit takes the player to the next level before accessing an episode. There is a set of 3 pathways with easy, medium, and hard skill levels. It is unclear as to whether the game actually did ship with the Samsung Nexus. The game is only available for the Dell X50V and X51V, both of which are PDAs, not mobile phones. Quake Mobile does not feature the 9 Inch Nails soundtrack due to space constraints. Quake Mobile runs the most recent version of GL Quake, Quake v.1.0 9GL 1.00, at 800 by 600 resolution and 25 frames per second. The most recent version of Quake Mobile is v.1.20, which has stylus support. There was an earlier version v.1.19 which lacked stylus support. The 2 Quake expansion packs, Scourge of Armagon and Dissolution of Eternity, are also available for Quake Mobile. A Flash-based version of the game by Michael Rennie runs Quake at full speed in any Flash-enabled web browser based on the shareware version of the game. It includes only the first episode and is available for free on the web. At the launch of the 2021 QuakeCon at home on August 19, 2021, Bethesda released an enhanced version of Quake for Microsoft Windows, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X/S consoles, developed by Night Dive Studios. In addition to support for modern systems and improved rendering techniques, the enhanced version includes both mission packs, Scourge of Armagon and Dissolution of Eternity. It also includes 2 episodes created by Machine Games, the previously released Dimension of the Past and a new one called Dimension of the Machine. A port of Quake 64 was also included in its entirety via the newly implemented add-on menu. Originally, there were 2 official expansion packs released for Quake. The expansion packs pick up where the first game left off, include all of the same weapons, power-ups, monsters, and gothic atmosphere/architecture, and continue/finish the story of the first game and its protagonist. An unofficial 3rd expansion pack, Abyss of Pandemonium, was developed by the Impel development team, published by Perfect Publishing, and released on April 14, 1998. An updated version, version 2. The 4th skill level, Nightmare, was described by the game manual to be so bad that the entry is hidden, so people won't wander in by accident. 0. Titled Abyss of Pandemonium, the final mission was released as freeware and authorized expansion pack. Q-Zone was developed and published by WizardWorks, and released in 1996. An authorized level editor, Deathmatch Maker, was developed by Virtus Corporation and published by Macmillan Digital Publishing in 1997. It contained an exclusive Virtus episode. In honor of Quake's 20th anniversary, Machine Games, an internal development studio of ZeniMax Media, who are the current owners of the Quake IP, released online a new expansion pack for free, called Episode 5, Dimension of the Past. Quake Mission Pack No. 1. Scourge of Armagon was the first official mission pack, released on March 5, 1997. Developed by Hypnotic Interactive, it features 3 episodes divided into 17 new single-player levels, 3 of which are secret, a new multiplayer level, a new soundtrack composed by Jihin Huang, and gameplay features not originally present in Quake, including rotating structures and breakable walls. Unlike the main Quake game and Mission Pack No. 2, Scourge does away with the episode hub, requiring the 3 episodes to be played sequentially. The 3 new enemies include Centroids, large cybernetic scorpions with nail guns, gremlins, small goblins that can steal weapons and multiply by feeding on enemy corpses, and spike mines, floating orbs that detonate when near the player. The 3 new weapons include the Mjolnir, a large lightning-emitting hammer, the laser cannon, which shoots bouncing bolts of energy, and the proximity mine launcher, which fires grenades that attach to surfaces and detonate when an opponent comes near. The 3 new power-ups include the Horn of Conjuring, which summons an enemy to protect the player, the Empathy Shield, which halves the damage taken by the player between the player and the attacking enemy, and the Wetsuit, which renders the player invulnerable to electricity and allows the player to stay underwater for a period of time. The storyline follows Armagon, a general of Quake's forces, planning to invade Earth via a portal known as the Rift. Armagon resembles a giant gremlin with cybernetic legs and a combined rocket launcher/laser cannon for arms. Quake's single-player campaign is organized into 4 individual episodes with 7 to 8 levels in each, including 1 secret level per episode, one of which is a low-gravity level that challenges the player's abilities in a different way. Tim Sode of GameSpot gave it a score 86 out of 10. Quake Mission Pack Number 2. Dissolution of Eternity was the second official mission pack, released on March 19, 1997. Developed by Rogue Entertainment, it features 2 episodes divided into 15 new single-player levels, a new multiplayer level, a new soundtrack, and several new enemies and bosses. Notably, the pack lacks secret levels. The 8 new enemies include electric eels, phantom swordsmen, multigrenade ogres, which fire cluster grenades, hellspawn, wraths, floating, robed undead, guardians, resurrected ancient Egyptian warriors, mummies, and statues of various enemies that can come to life. The 4 new types of bosses include lava men, overlords, large wraths, and a dragon guarding the temporal energy converter. The 2 new power-ups include the anti-grav belt, which allows the player to jump higher, and the power shield, which lowers the damage the player receives. Rather than offering new weapons, the mission pack gives the player 4 new types of ammo for existing weapons, such as lava nails for the nail gun, cluster grenades for the grenade launcher, rockets that split into 4 in a horizontal line for the rocket launcher, and plasma cells for the thunderbolt, as well as a grappling hook to help with moving around the levels. Tim Sode of GameSpot gave it a score of 77 out of 10. To celebrate Quake's 20th anniversary, a mission pack was developed by Machine Games and released on June 24, 2016. It features 10 new single-player levels and a new multiplayer level, but does not use new gameplay additions from Scourge of Armagon and Dissolution of Eternity. The 4th mission pack, Dimension of the Machine, was released as part of the enhanced version of Quake released on August 19, 2021. Quake can be heavily modified by altering the graphics, audio, or scripting in Quake C, and has been the focus of many fan-created modifications, known as mods. If the player's character dies, they must restart at the beginning of that level. The game may be saved at any time in the PC versions and between levels in the console versions. The first mods were small gameplay fixes and patches initiated by the community, usually enhancements to weapons or gameplay with new enemies. Later mods were more ambitious and resulted in Quake fans creating versions of the game that were drastically different from ID Software's original release. The first major Quake mod was Team Fortress. This mod consists of capture the flag gameplay with a class system for the players. Players choose a class, which creates various restrictions on weapons and armor types available to that player, and also grants special abilities. For example, the Bread and Butter Soldier class has medium armor, medium speed, and a well-rounded selection of weapons and grenades, while the Scout class is lightly armored, very fast, has a scanner that detects nearby enemies but has very weak offensive weapons. One of the other differences with CTF is the fact that the flag is not returned automatically when a player drops it. Running over one's flag in 3-wave CTF would return the flag to the base, and in TF the flag remains in the same spot for preconfigured time and it has to be defended on remote locations. This caused a shift in defensive tactics compared to 3-wave CTF. Team Fortress maintained its standing as the most played online Quake modification for many years. After the developers joined Valve, Team Fortress was ported to the Gold Source engine as Team Fortress Classic. It later received a sequel, Team Fortress 2, for which content continues to be developed. Another popular mod was 3-wave Capture the Flag, CTF. Primarily authored by Dave Zoid Kirsch, 3-wave CTF is a partial conversion consisting of new levels, a new weapon, a grappling hook, power-ups, new textures, and new gameplay rules. Typically, 2 teams, red and blue, would compete in a game of Capture the Flag, though a few maps with up to 4 teams, red, blue, green, and yellow, were created. Capture the Flag soon became a standard game mode included in most popular multiplayer games released after Quake. Upon completing an episode, the player is returned to the hub start level, where another episode can be chosen. Each episode starts the player from scratch, without any previously collected items. Rocket Arena provides the ability for players to face each other in small, open arenas with changes in the gameplay rules, so that item collection and detailed level knowledge are no longer factors. A series of short rounds, with the surviving player in each round gaining a point, instead tests the player's aiming and dodging skills and reflexes. Clan Arena is a further modification that provides team play using Rocket Arena rules. One mod category, bots, was introduced to provide surrogate players in multiplayer mode. Arcane Dimensions is a single-player mod. It is a partial conversion with breakable objects and walls, enhanced particle system, numerous visual improvements, and new enemies and weapons. The level design is much more complex in terms of geometry and gameplay than in the original game. There are a large number of custom levels that have been made by users and fans of Quake as of 2019. New maps are still being made, over 20 years since the game's release. Custom maps are new maps that are playable by loading them into the original game. Custom levels of various gameplay types have been made, but most are in the single-player and deathmatch genres. More than 1,500 single-player and a similar number of deathmatch maps have been made for Quake. Quake was critically acclaimed on the PC. Aggregating review websites GameRankings and Metacritic gave the original PC version 93% and 94/100, and the Nintendo 64 port 76% and 74 out of 100. A next-generation critic lauded the game's realistic 3D physics and genuinely unnerving sound effects. GamePro said Quake had been overhyped but is excellent nonetheless, particularly its usage of its advanced 3D engine. The review also praised the sound effects, atmospheric music, and graphics, though it criticized that the polygons used to construct the enemies are too obvious at close range. Episode 1, which formed the shareware or downloadable demo version of Quake, has the most traditional layout with a boss in the last level. The ultimate objective at the end of each episode is to recover a magic rune. Less than a month after Quake was released and a month before they actually reviewed the game, Next Generation listed it as number 9 on their top 100 games of all time, saying that it is similar to Doom but supports a maximum of 8 players instead of 4. In 1996, Computer Gaming World declared Quake the 36th best computer game ever released, and listed Telefragged as number 1 on its list of the 15 best ways to die in computer gaming. In 1997, the Game Developers' Choice Awards gave Quake 3 Spotlight Awards for Best Sound Effects, Best Music or Soundtrack, and Best Online/Internet Game. Entertainment Weekly gave the game a B+ and called it an extended bit of subterranean mayhem that offers 3 major improvements over its immediate predecessor. He identified these as the graphics, the audio design, and the amount of violent action. Next Generation reviewed the Macintosh version of the game, rating it 4 stars out of 5, and stated that, though replay value is limited by the lack of interactive environments or even the semblance of a plot, there's no doubt that Quake and its engine are something powerful and addictive. The Saturn version received mostly negative reviews, as critics generally agreed that it did not bring over the elements that make the game enjoyable. In particular, critics reviled the absence of the multiplayer mode, which they felt had eclipsed the single-player campaign as the reason to play Quake. Craig Kujawa wrote in Electronic Gaming Monthly, "Quake is not a great one-player game. It gained its notoriety on the net as a multiplayer, and his co-reviewer SushiX concluded without multiplayer, I'd pass." Most reviews also said the controls are much worse than the PC original, in particular the difficulty of aiming at enemies without the benefit of either mouse-controlled camera or a second analog stick. After all of the runes are collected, the floor of the hub level opens up to reveal an entrance to the END level, which contains a final puzzle. GamePro noted that the graphics are very pixelated and blurry, to the point where people unfamiliar with Quake would not be able to discern what they're looking at. They concluded, Quake may not be the worst Saturn game available, but it certainly doesn't live up to its PC heritage. Most critics did find the port technically impressive, particularly the added light sourcing. However, Next Generation pointed out that porting Quake to a console is nothing more than an excuse for bragging rights. It's simply a way to show that the limited architecture of a 32-bit system has the power to push the same game that those mighty Pentium PCs take for granted. Even Rich Ledbetter of Sega Saturn magazine, which gave the port a 92%, acknowledged that it was a proverbial dancing bear, noting several conspicuous compromises the port made and stating as his concluding argument, "Look, it's Quake on the Saturn, the machine has no right to be doing this." GameSpot opined that the game's lack of plot makes the single-player campaign feel too shallow and lacking in motivation to appeal to most gamers. Most critics compared the port unfavorably to the Saturn version of Duke Nukem 3D, which came out just a few months earlier, mainly in terms of gameplay. Reviews for the Nintendo 64 version praised its lighting effects and smooth frame rate in single-player mode. IGN added the caveats that the environments are simplified from the PC version and the pre-rendered light sourcing is less impressive than the real-time light sourcing of the Saturn version, but judged the visuals overall to be superior to those of the unaccelerated PC version. GamePro went so far as to say the graphics are as clean as those of GL Quake, while Next Generation was more moderate, concluding that, as a whole, Quake 64 doesn't live up to the experience offered by the high-end, 3D-accelerated PC version. It is, however, an entertaining gaming experience that is worthy of a close look and a nice addition to the blossoming number of first-person shooters for Nintendo 64. Most reviews found fault with the multiplayer, stating that the frame rate takes a hit in this mode. Some of the levels are too large with only 2 players present, and the game should have supported 4 players as previous Nintendo 64 shooters Hexen, Beyond Heretic and GoldenEye 007 did. In multiplayer mode, players on several computers connect to a server, which may be a dedicated machine or on one of the players' computers, where they can either play the single-player campaign together in co-op, cooperative, mode, or play against each other in multiplayer, see LAN Party. However, Next Generation pointed out that on the Nintendo 64, Quake with 4 players would inevitably have meant a severely compromised frame rate and small view screen. GameSpot also felt the multiplayer was fun despite its limitations, and noted that setting up a deathmatch was quicker and easier on the Nintendo 64 than on PC. Reviewers sharply differed over the controls, with Electronic Gaming Monthly, IGN, and GamePro all describing them as precise, responsive, and intuitive, while GameSpot and Next Generation complained that finding the right control required fiddling with the settings and even at best felt lacking compared to a keyboard and mouse setup. Reviews generally concluded that while the Nintendo 64 version would not appeal to Quake veterans due to its multiplayer shortcomings and lack of exclusive content, it was a strong enough conversion for non-PC gamers to enjoy the Quake experience. Next Generation reviewed the arcade version of the game, rating it 3 stars out of 5, and stated that, for those who don't have LAN or internet capabilities, check out Arcade Quake, it's a blast. In 1998, PC Gamer declared it the 28th best computer game ever released, and the editors called it one of the most addictive, adaptable, and pulse-pounding 3D shooters ever created. In 2003, Quake was inducted into GameSpot's list of the greatest games of all time. Nintendo Life gave the Switch version a rave review, saying it wisely avoids tinkering with the magic formula that made the game so great in the first place, instead keeping the look and feel of the original intact whilst carefully adding all manner of modern bells and whistles in a feature-packed port that's an absolute dream to spend time with. They particularly praised the level designs, puzzle elements, atmospheric game world, and numerous configuration options for the graphical upgrades and multiplayer sessions. They argued that the smooth performance in both docked and handheld mode and ability to play the game as portable makes the Switch version the definitive version of the game. When players die in multiplayer mode, they can immediately respawn, but will lose any items that were collected similarly. Items that have been picked up previously respawn after some time, and may be picked up again. According to David Kushner in Masters of Doom, ID Software released a retail shareware version of Quake before the game's full retail distribution by GT Interactive. These shareware copies could be converted into complete versions through passwords purchased via phone. However, Kushner wrote that gamers wasted no time hacking the shareware to unlock the full version of the game for free. This problem, combined with the scale of the operation, led ID Software to cancel the plan. As a result, the company was left with 150,000 unsold shareware copies in storage. The venture damaged Quake's initial sales and caused its retail push by GT Interactive to miss the holiday shopping season. Following the game's full release, Kushner remarked that its early sales were good with 250,000 units shipped, but not a phenomenon like Doom 2. In the United States, Quake placed 6th on PC Data's monthly computer game sales charts for November and December 1996. Its shareware edition was the 6th best-selling computer game of 1996 overall, while its retail SKU claimed 20th place. The shareware version sold 393,575 copies and grossed $3,005,519, $539 million in 2023. In the United States during 1996. It remained in PC Data's monthly top 10 from January to April 1997, but was absent by May. During its first 12 months, Quake sold 373,000 retail copies and earned $18 million in the United States, according to PC Data. Its final retail sales for 1997 were 273,936 copies, which made it the country's 16th highest computer game seller for the year in 1997. ID estimated that there may be as many as 5 million copies of Quake circulating. The game sold over 1.4 million copies by December 1997. Sales of Quake reached 550,000 units in the United States alone by December 1999. The source code of Quake was released on December 22, 1999. The most popular multiplayer modes are all forms of deathmatch. Deathmatch modes typically consist of either free-for-all, no organization or teams involved, one-on-one duels, or organized team play with 2 or more players per team or clan. The ID software maps, objects, textures, sounds, and other creative works remain under their original proprietary license. The shareware distribution of Quake is still freely redistributable and usable with the GPL'd engine code. One must purchase a copy of Quake in order to receive the registered version of the game, which includes more single-player episodes and the deathmatch maps. Based on the success of the first Quake game, Quake 2, Quake 3 Arena, and Quake 4 were published, with Quake 4 being developed by Raven Software using the Doom 3 engine. Quake was the game primarily responsible for the emergence of the machinima art form of films made in game engines. Thanks to edited Quake demos such as Ranger Gone Bad and Blobalicious, the in-game film The Devil's Covenant, and the in-game rendered 4-hour epic film The Seal of Nahara. On June 22, 2006, it had been 10 years since the original uploading of the game to Kdromcom archives. Many internet forums had topics about it, and it was a front-page story on Slashdot. On October 11, 2006, John Romero released the original map files for all of the levels in Quake. Quake has 4 sequels: Quake 2, Quake 3 Arena, Quake 4, and Enemy Territory, Quake Wars. In 2002, a version of Quake was produced for mobile phones. A copy of Quake was also released as a compilation in 2001, labeled Ultimate Quake, which included the original Quake, Quake 2, and Quake 3 Arena, which was published by Activision. In 2008, Quake was honored at the 59th Annual Technology and Engineering Emmy Awards for advancing the art form of user-modifiable games. John Carmack accepted the award. Years after its original release, Quake is still regarded by many critics as one of the greatest and most influential games ever made. In 2025, the Strong National Museum of Play inducted Quake into its World Video Game Hall of Fame. Co-creator of Quake, John Romero, attended the induction ceremony. Players frequently implement mods during teamplay. Monsters are not normally present in teamplay, as they get in the way and reveal the positions of the players. Lindsay Carano of the Strong Museum said, "Quake's legacy lives on in its atmospheric single-player campaign, its influence in how online games are played, its active modding community, and its creation and shaping of esports." As an example of the dedication that Quake has inspired in its fan community, a group of expert players recorded speedrun demos, replayable recordings of the player's movement, of Quake levels completed in record time on the Nightmare skill level. The footage was edited into a continuous 19 minutes, 49 seconds demo called Quake Done Quick and released on June 10, 1997. Owners of Quake could replay this demo in the game engine, watching the run unfold as if they were playing it themselves. Most full-game speedruns are a collaborative effort by a number of runners, though some have been done by single runners on their own. Although each particular level is credited to one runner, the ideas and techniques used are iterative and collaborative in nature, with each runner picking up tips and ideas from the others, so that speeds keep improving beyond what was thought possible as the runs are further optimized and new tricks or routes are discovered. Further time improvements of the continuous whole game run were achieved into the 21st century. In addition, Many thousands of individual level runs are kept at Speed Demo's Archives Quake section, including many on custom maps. Speedrunning is a counterpart to multiplayer modes in making Quake one of the first games promoted as a virtual sport. The release of Quake marks the end of the classic lineup at ID Software. Due to conflicts and burnout, the majority of the staff resigned from ID after the game's release, including Romero, Abrash, Sean Green, Jay Wilbur, Peterson, and Mike Wilson. Peterson claimed in July 2021 that the lack of a team leader was the cause of it all. He volunteered to take lead as he had 5 years of experience as project manager in Microprose, but he was turned down by Carmack. Romero has discussed their relative lack of experience at the time and failure to communicate with one another, and has stated that there is no long-lasting animosity between the staff. The gameplay in Quake was considered unique for its time because of the different ways the player can maneuver through the game. Even though he led the project, Romero did not receive any money from Quake. In 2000, Romero released Daikatana, the game that he envisioned Quake being, and despite its shaky development, and being considered one of the worst games of all time, he said Daikatana was more fun to make than Quake, due to the lack of creative interference. After the departure of Sandy Peterson, the remaining ID employees chose to change the thematic direction substantially for Quake 2, making the design more technological and futuristic, rather than maintaining the focus on Lovecraftian horror. Quake 4 followed the design themes of Quake 2, whereas Quake 3 Arena mixed these styles. It had a parallel setting that housed several ID All-Stars from various games as playable characters. The mixed settings occurred because Quake 2 originally began as a separate product line. The ID designers fell back on the project's nickname of Quake 2, because the game's fast-paced, tactile feel felt closer to a Quake game than a new franchise. Since any sequel to the original Quake had already been vetoed, it became a way of continuing the series without continuing the storyline or setting of the first game. In June 2011, John Carmack made an offhand comment that ID Software was considering going back to the mixed-up Cthulhu-ish Quake 1 world and rebooting that direction. Bunny hopping or strafe jumping allow faster movement, while rocket jumping enables the player to reach otherwise inaccessible areas at the cost of some self-damage. The player can start and stop moving suddenly, jump unnaturally high, and change direction while moving through the air. Many of these non-realistic behaviors contribute to Quake's appeal. Multiplayer Quake was one of the first games singled out as a form of electronic sport. A notable participant was Dennis Fong, who won John Carmack's Ferrari 328 at the Microsoft-sponsored Red Annihilation Tournament in 1997. In the single-player game, the player takes the role of the protagonist, unnamed in Quake but referred to as Ranger in later games, voiced by Trent Reznor, who is sent into a portal in order to stop an enemy codenamed Quake. The government had been experimenting with teleportation technology and developed a working prototype called a slipgate. The mysterious Quake compromised the slipgate by connecting it with its own teleportation system, using it to send death squads to the human dimension in order to test the martial capabilities of humanity. The sole surviving protagonist in Operation Counter-Strike is Ranger, who must advance, starting each of the 4 episodes from an overrun human military base, before fighting his way into other dimensions, reaching them via the slipgate or their otherworld equivalent. After passing through the slipgate, Ranger's main objective is to collect 4 magic runes from 4 dimensions of Quake. These are the key to stopping the enemy and ending the invasion of Earth. The single-player campaign consists of 30 separate levels, or maps, divided into 4 episodes with a total of 26 regular maps and 4 secret ones, as well as a hub level to select a difficulty setting and episode, and the game's final boss level. Each episode represents individual dimensions that the player can access through the slipgate or magical portals, in the case of the latter 3 episodes, that are discovered over the course of the game. The various realms consist of a number of Gothic, medieval, and lava-filled caves and dungeons, with a recurring theme of hellish and satanic imagery reminiscent of Doom, such as pentagrams and images of demons on the walls. The game's setting is inspired by dark fantasy influences, including H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. Dimensional shamblers appear as enemies. The spawn enemies are called Formless Spawn of Tsathoggua in the manual. The boss of the first episode is named Thon. The main villain is named Shub-Niggurath and is explicitly stated to be an old one, and the 4 episodes all have Lovecraftian names. Quake's development was troubled, and the game went through several incarnations over the course of its development. In the early 1990s, the staff at ID Software had a private Dungeons & Dragons game, which would go on to inspire a number of elements in their titles over the following years. With John Carmack as DM, the campaign featured a group of adventurers named the Silver Shadow Band. The group were named for the silver dragon on which they flew, and each represented one of the core stats of the game. Among them was a powerful character named Quake, representing strength, who fought with a magic hammer capable of destroying buildings. Quake was accompanied by a floating magic artifact named the Hellgate Cube, which attacked his foes with lightning bolts. John Romero described fighting alongside Quake as the most fun they had playing D&D. The Silver Shadow Band did contract work for justice, an even more powerful group. The original campaign concluded in early 1992, after Romero's character made a deal with a demon, exchanging a book called the Demonomicron for a magic sword called the Daikatana, which resulted in a demonic invasion that wiped out the material plane. A preview included with ID Software's first release, 1990's Commander Keen, advertised a game entitled The Fight for Justice as a follow-up to the Commander Keen trilogy. It would feature a character named Quake, the strongest, most dangerous person on the continent, armed with thunderbolts and a ring of regeneration. Conceived as a VGA full-color side-scrolling role-playing video game, The Fight for Justice was never released. The team briefly explored making the project in 1991 but abandoned the idea as the technology for it simply did not exist at the time. The project was only in development for about 2 weeks. A return to the Quake concept was raised by John Romero in a meeting in late 1994, when discussing the next engine and main project after the completion of Doom 2. Newer members of the team, including American McGee and Sandy Peterson, had not been present for the original D&D campaign or game project, but were on board with the idea after it was explained to them, and the team was then in agreement about the broad direction of the title. In a December 1, 1994, post to an online bulletin board, John Romero wrote, "Okay, people, it seems that everyone is speculating on whether Quake is going to be a slow, RPG-style light action game. Wrong. What does ID do best and dominate at? Can you say action? I knew you could. Quake will be constant, hectic action throughout, probably more so than Doom." The team entered into an R&D phase while Carmack was working on the engine. By 1995, the outline for the game included a medieval setting, hand-to-hand combat, thrown weapons, an area of effect attack with the hammer, and feeding souls to the Hellgate Cube. Some early information on Quake was released publicly, focusing on a Thor-like character who wields a giant hammer. A close-up of Quake holding his hammer was on the cover of PC Gamer for the October 1995 issue, and screenshots showed medieval environments and a dragon. Romero revealed in 2023 that the dragon model was never actually implemented, and had simply been placed in the sky for the screenshot. The plan was for the game to have more role-playing style elements. An Aztec-style texture set was developed for the project, but the set was not used due to artistic opposition from American McGee, who preferred a more heavy metal-themed look for his levels. The second texture set was used for the Vaults of Zin. Before gameplay could be worked on in earnest, Carmack would need to build the game engine, which was a significant undertaking, and took much longer than anticipated. Carmack was not only developing a fully 3D engine, but also a TCP/IP networking model. Carmack later said that he should have done 2 separate projects which developed those things: the networking model first, used for a game which was otherwise in the Doom 2 engine, and then the 3D overhaul for a second title. The Quake engine popularized several major advances in the genre: polygonal models instead of pre-rendered sprites, full 3D level design instead of a 2.5D map, pre-rendered light maps, and allowing end users to partially program the game, in this case with Quake C, which popularized fan-created modifications, mods. Working with a game engine that was still in development presented difficulties for the designers. Around 50 levels were developed during the R&D process, but engine changes meant that the team was frequently having to redo work. Much of this needed to be scrapped by the time the engine was completed in late 1995. The team was burned out from the process, and raised the idea of using the existing demo levels for a first-person shooter, as it would be faster and less risky. Romero opposed the change, but relented. The creative differences would ultimately lead to his departure from the company after completing Quake. Quake was programmed by John Carmack, Michael Abrash, and John Cash. The levels and scenarios were designed by American McGee, Sandy Peterson, John Romero, and Tim Willits, and the graphics were designed by Adrian Carmack, Kevin Cloud and Paul Steedcloud created the monster and player graphics using Alias. Initially, the game was designed so that when the player ran out of ammunition, the player character would hit enemies with a gun, but shortly before release this was replaced with an axe. ID Software released Q-Test on February 24, 1996. A technology demo limited to 3 multiplayer maps. There was no single-player support, and some of the gameplay and graphics were unfinished or different from their final versions. Q-Test gave gamers their first peek into the file system and modifiability of the Quake engine, and many entity mods that placed monsters in the otherwise empty multiplayer maps, and custom player skins began appearing online before the full game was even released. Morale on the project was low, and developers were under crunch from December 1995 through to release in June 1996. Romero has described the process as one of the hardest grinds of his career. He was the only member of the team to attend the office on launch day to upload the files. Quake's music and sound design was done by Trent Reznor and 9 Inch Nails, using ambient soundscapes and synthesized drones to create atmospheric tracks. In an interview, Reznor remarked that the Quake soundtrack is not music, winky face, it's textures and ambiances and whirling machine noises and stuff. We tried to make the most sinister, depressive, scary, frightening kind of thing. It's been fun. The game includes an homage to Reznor in the form of ammo boxes for the nail gun and super nail gun decorated with the 9 Inch Nails logo. The idea to use 9 Inch Nails for the soundtrack was raised by American McGee, who had been listening to their album The Downward Spiral during his work on the game. Romero was initially skeptical as he had envisioned a more ambient tone, but was open to the idea of the band composing with that tone in mind. ID approached the band's agents, and the group had agreed to do the soundtrack by the following day. As they were Doom fans and excited by the project, McGee handled the delivery of the soundtrack from there on. A legal issue that rose late in development with the record company meant that the code to play the audio from the CD was among the final changes made before release. Some digital re-releases of the game lacked the CD soundtrack that came with the original shareware. Released the 2021 enhanced version includes the soundtrack. In late 1996, ID Software released vQuake, a source port of the Quake engine to support hardware-accelerated rendering on graphics cards using the Rendition VRIT chipset. Aside from the expected benefit of improved performance, vQuake offered numerous visual improvements over the original software-rendered Quake. It boasted full 16-bit color, bilinear filtering, reducing pixelation, improved dynamic lighting, optional anti-aliasing, and improved source code clarity, as the improved performance finally allowed the use of gotos to be abandoned in favor of proper loop constructs. As the name implied, vQuake was a proprietary source port specifically for the VRIT. Consumer 3D acceleration was in its infancy at the time, and there was no standard 3D API for the consumer market. After completing vQuake, John Carmack vowed to never write a proprietary port again, citing his frustration with Rendition's speedy 3D API. To improve the quality of online play, ID Software released Quake World in December 1996, a build of the Quake engine that featured significantly revamped network code, including the addition of client-side prediction. The original Quake's network code would not show the player the results of their actions until the server sent back a reply acknowledging them. For example, if the player attempted to move forward, the client would send the request to move forward to the server, and the server would determine whether the client was actually able to move forward or if it ran into an obstacle, such as a wall or another player. The server would then respond to the client, and only then would the client display movement to the player. This was fine for play on a LAN, a high-bandwidth, very low-latency connection, but the latency over a dial-up internet connection is much larger than on a LAN, and this caused a noticeable delay between when a player tried to act and when that action was visible on the screen. This made gameplay much more difficult, especially since the unpredictable nature of the internet made the amount of delay vary from moment to moment. Players would experience jerky, laggy motion that sometimes felt like ice skating, where they would slide around with seemingly no ability to stop, due to a buildup of previously sent movement requests. John Carmack has admitted that this was a serious problem that should have been fixed before release, but it was not caught because he and other developers had high-speed internet access at home. After months of private beta testing, Quake World, written by John Carmack with help from John Cash and Christian Ankow, was released on December 13, 1996. The client portion followed on December 17. Official ID Software development stopped with the test release of Quake World 2.33 on December 21, 1998. The last official stable release was 2.30. Quake World has been described by IGN as the first popular first-person shooter meant to be played online. With the help of client-side prediction, which allowed players to see their own movement immediately without waiting for a response from the server, Quake World's network code allowed players with high-latency connections to control their character's movement almost as precisely as when playing in single-player mode. The netcode parameters could be adjusted by the user so that Quake World performed well for users with high and low latency. The trade-off to client-side prediction was that sometimes other players or objects would no longer be quite where they had appeared to be, or, in extreme cases, that the player would be pulled back to a previous position when the client received a late reply from the server which overrode movement the client had already previewed. This was known as warping. As a result, some serious players, particularly in the US, still preferred to play online using the original Quake engine, commonly called NetQuake, rather than Quake World. However, the majority of players, especially those on dial-up connections, preferred the newer network model, and Quake World soon became the dominant form of online play. Following the success of Quake World, client-side prediction has become a standard feature of nearly all real-time online games.